Was Abraham Lincoln truly the great emancipator we learn about in school, or is there a more complex hidden story that's been deliberately scrubbed from our history books? Today, we're pulling back the curtain on one of America's most iconic presidents to uncover the truths they tried to erase. Let's start with the big one: emancipation. The common story is that Lincoln, a moral crusader, went to war to free the slaves, but the reality is far more complicated. In his first inaugural address in 1861, Lincoln was crystal clear. He said, "I have no purpose, directly or indirectly, to interfere with the institution of slavery in the states where it exists. I believe I have no lawful right to do so, and I have no inclination to do so." His primary goal, his absolute priority, was to preserve the Union. Everything else was secondary. So what changed? Why did he issue the Emancipation Proclamation? It wasn't a sudden moral awakening. It was a strategic, military necessity. By 1862, the Civil War was dragging on, with staggering casualties on both sides. The Union needed a game-changer. The Emancipation Proclamation, which only freed slaves in the rebellious Confederate states, not in the Union-loyal border states, was a masterful political and military maneuver. It crippled the Confederacy's labor force, prevented European powers like Britain and France from officially recognizing the South, and allowed for the recruitment of nearly 200,000 black soldiers into the Union Army. These men were crucial to the Union's victory. So, while the outcome was monumental for human freedom, Lincoln's motivation was primarily about winning the war and saving the Union. But let's dig deeper into a part of Lincoln's story that is almost completely forgotten: his views on race and colonization. Throughout much of his political career, Lincoln was a vocal supporter of the American Colonization Society. This group believed that free black people could never achieve equality in the United States and advocated for their resettlement or deportation, primarily to Africa or Central America. This wasn't some fringe idea. It was a mainstream political position at the time, and Lincoln was one of its most prominent champions. As late as August 1862, just a month before he issued the preliminary Emancipation Proclamation, Lincoln hosted a delegation of prominent free black leaders at the White House. What was the purpose of this historic meeting? Not to discuss abolition or civil rights. It was to persuade them to lead an exodus of black Americans out of the country. He told them, "Your race suffer very greatly, many of them, by living among us, while ours suffer from your presence. It is better for us both, therefore, to be separated." He even had Congress allocate funds for a colonization project in Panama. This plan ultimately failed due to disease and diplomatic issues, but it reveals a stark and uncomfortable truth about Lincoln's vision for a post-slavery America. It wasn't a vision of an integrated, multiracial society. It was a vision of a predominantly white nation. Now, let's talk about Lincoln's actions as a wartime president. To maintain control and win the war, Lincoln took steps that many today would consider unconstitutional. He suspended the writ of habeas corpus, a fundamental legal protection that prevents unlawful imprisonment. This allowed the military to arrest and detain thousands of civilians without trial, including newspaper editors, politicians, and ordinary citizens suspected of being Southern sympathizers. The Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, Roger Taney, actually ruled that Lincoln's actions were illegal, but Lincoln simply ignored the ruling. He argued that he needed to violate one part of the Constitution in order to save the entire thing. Was he a tyrant or a pragmatic leader doing what was necessary in a time of unprecedented crisis? The debate still rages today. Furthermore, his administration oversaw the suppression of dissent on a massive scale. Hundreds of newspapers critical of the war effort were shut down by military force. General Ambrose Burnside issued General Order No. 38, which made it an arrestable offense to publicly express sympathy for the enemy. This led to the famous arrest of Ohio politician Clement Vallandigham for giving an anti-war speech. Lincoln eventually commuted his sentence, but had him exiled to the Confederacy. These actions paint a picture of a leader willing to push the boundaries of presidential power far beyond what had ever been seen before. And what about the Native American experience during Lincoln's presidency? While the nation was consumed by the Civil War, another tragic conflict was unfolding on the frontier. In 1862, the Dakota War erupted in Minnesota after the government failed to provide promised food and payments to the starving Dakota people. After a swift and brutal military response, hundreds of Dakota men were sentenced to death in hasty military trials. Lincoln personally reviewed every case. While he commuted the sentences of most, he approved the execution of 38 Dakota men. On December 26, 1862, these 38 men were hanged simultaneously in Mankato, Minnesota. It remains the largest mass execution in U.S. history. While some praise Lincoln for saving hundreds from the gallows, others point to this event as a dark stain on his legacy, a continuation of the brutal policies against indigenous peoples that defined much of American history. So, how do we make sense of this deeply conflicted figure? It's crucial to understand that Lincoln was a man of his time, holding many of the common prejudices of the 19th century. But he was also a man capable of immense growth. His views on slavery and race evolved significantly over the course of the war. In the beginning, his goal was simply to save the Union with or without slavery. But as the war progressed, and as he witnessed the courage of black soldiers and the undeniable moral bankruptcy of the institution, his perspective shifted. By his second inaugural address in 1865, just weeks before his death, his tone had changed dramatically. He spoke of the sin of slavery with a profound sense of moral clarity, suggesting the war was divine punishment for the offense. He called for malice toward none, with charity for all, to bind up the nation's wounds. And in his final public speech, he did something unthinkable just a few years earlier. He publicly endorsed giving the right to vote to some black Americans, specifically the very intelligent and those who serve our cause as soldiers. This was a radical step, and it's believed to be what sealed his fate. In the audience that night was John Wilkes Booth, who was enraged by the idea of black suffrage and reportedly said, "That is the last speech he will ever make." 3 days later, Lincoln was assassinated. The real Abraham Lincoln wasn't a simple hero carved in marble. He was a complex, pragmatic, and sometimes ruthless politician who was also capable of profound moral and intellectual growth. The story of Lincoln is the story of America itself, a story of conflicting ideals, of struggling with its original sins, and of a slow, painful, and often contradictory journey toward a more perfect union. The reason these uncomfortable truths are often sidelined is that we prefer simple myth to complex realities. We want a flawless hero. But ignoring Lincoln's flaws and contradictions does a disservice to history and to the man himself. His greatness lies not in being perfect, but in his ability to rise above his own limitations and guide the nation through its darkest hour, ultimately setting it on a new, more just, though still unfinished path. What do you think? Does this more complex picture change your view of Lincoln? Let us know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and if you found this journey into the hidden corners of history interesting, please be sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more deep dives. We'll see you next time.